So welcome to lecture 8 of this series on moral psychology. It's wonderful to have you here. We've now become an extremely select group, so I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the questions that you're asking, and I hope that you're going to enjoy thinking about some topics this week. I should say that this lecture, unlike most of the other ones, is not something you can take independently. It's really a continuation of topics considered in lecture 7, where we introduced a dual process theory of moral psychology and what I called a loose reconstruction of Green's point and shoot argument for the conclusion that premises which are not justified inferentially premises, so they may not be justified, but they're certainly not justified inferentially. Those premises, when they concern particular moral scenarios, can't be used in ethical arguments where the aim is knowledge. So if you haven't got that argument in your head, please go back and have a look at the argument in lecture 7. You do not need to understand everything that happened in lecture 7. Not at all. You've just got to have the main bit. If this were a live lecture, I'd be doing a recap, but I figure you may not want me to do a recap because you may already have it in your head, and if you don't already have it in your head, you can go and check out the lecture because it's still there just the same as it was last week. Alright, so it's a bit different, but we're going to be looking at this argument, and in particular what I'm going to try to do first of all in this lecture, in connection with discussing rules on reflective equilibrium, is to provide a generalization of the argument. You see how I did that? I'm sneaking in a bit extra here. So actually the conclusion isn't really just about moral scenarios. The conclusion also prohibits the use of not justified inferentially premises concerning any debatable general principles, insofar as we're constructing an ethical argument where the aim is to acquire, through the argument, knowledge of the conclusion. So you see that's quite a dramatic conclusion, so one that seems right and proper that we would spend a little bit more time exploring. So here's what I want to do. I want to think about the possible extensions that we can make to this argument. So and it's significant. So for example, I've just suggested that we can extend the argument to establish not just that not justified inferentially premises about particular moral scenarios are prohibited, but also that any not justified inferentially premises about general principles are prohibited. So let's see if I can get you to agree with me that if the original argument's right, then the extended argument is also going to work as well. I also want to explore Green's suggestion that his argument allows us to provide a kind of defense of consequentialism. I think the loose reconstruction probably won't allow us to do that, but interestingly, it does allow us to eliminate many of the standard objections to broadly consequentialist or utilitarian theories in ethics. So it may be significant in that way as well. But perhaps most importantly, I think that the loose reconstruction of Green's argument explains what's wrong with a very influential method of doing things in ethics, which is really due to rules. He's responsible for introducing this to ethics, although not for the method which was early used in other domains. And this is the method of reflective equilibrium. I think that either the loose reconstruction of Green is correct, or either the loose reconstruction of Green is wrong, there must be some objection to that, and then you've got to tell me what the objection is. Or else the method of reflective equilibrium is just a mistake. In fact, I would go so far, and I will say this later, the method of reflective equilibrium is actually guaranteed to lead us into error. It's a method which couldn't be better designed to generate errors, that we will find it incredibly hard to detect. So I think that's an interesting and significant consequence that I want to explore with you in some detail later. But you may not care about that, and that's absolutely fine, because in this lecture you can skip around fairly freely, although you do need to take a look at the section on auxiliary hypotheses. I'm going to refer back to that quite a few times, because there I'm just trying to straighten out what the minimum commitments of the argument actually are. Another thing I want to do in today's lecture is to look at some quick objections to the loose reconstruction of Green's arguments. The motivation here is very simple. We have a bunch of consequences of this argument. So many of my favourite philosophers in ethics, I can't actually use their arguments if the reconstruction of Green is right. It's just their arguments are just mistaken, insofar as my aim is to gain knowledge of ethics. I'm not super happy about that, of course. So it would be quite nice if I could come up with a good objection to Green's argument. At least I should certainly, I should search for that before I give up on the ethics. And if I'm looking for objections, my first starting point, the first thing I want to do is a quick one. That's to say one that I can make without any deep knowledge or understanding of the matter. So I'm going to look at the literature, and I've selected 3 candidate quick objections, and unfortunately none of them work. None of those quick objections work, in my view. And then I'm challenging you to come up, if you can this week, that would be great, or next week, or indeed any other time, with a quick objection, if you can. Right? And an onerous objection is fine too, but quick objections are the best because, of course, they require a lot less of our scarce cognitive resources. Now, because I think that I can't find a quick objection, and I'm sort of not absolutely 100% counting on you to do that, I'm also going to go ahead and look at evidence for and against the dual process theory. And unfortunately, I'm not going to finish that this week, so that's turns out to be quite a big job. So what I'm going to do this week is take a look at evidence for the dual process theory. Now, if that evidence for the dual process theory on evaluation turns out not to be super strong, I won't accept the loose reconstruction. We can stop. I'm going to spoil this for you. The evidence for it actually turns out, I think, to be really quite strong indeed. So what we'll do next week, my last hope really here, is that I can come up with some evidence against the dual process theory. If I can come up with some evidence against the dual process theory, then maybe I don't need to accept the conclusion of the loose reconstruction after all, but maybe I do. That's going to be super interesting. So I hope that you enjoy working through some of the topics in this week's lecture, that you find perhaps 1 or 2 of the readings interesting, or maybe there are some things you're too busy now, but there are some things that you're noting you're going to do later. I should say, by the way, if you are busy, you've been working really hard on this course, you're still here in lecture 8, you're one of just very few people who are watching this, think absolutely nothing of saying to me, look, Steve, I'm really sorry, but I can't quite keep up with you this week. I'm going to take a week out and focus on the other, crazy things I'm doing, the deadlines. Think nothing of that. Think nothing of that. You will be okay. You can come back to some of this material later. It's not going to go anywhere. But if you do manage to get through this, or you're still thinking about what happened in lecture 7 or some of the early lectures, I would really love for you to send me some questions. Some of you have been doing this very reliably, and I'm grateful to you for that. But if you have been sending questions, carry on. Even better. If you haven't sent a question yet, it's not too late. We have this live session on Thursday, and if you have any questions at all, even quite silly questions, please do ask them on Thursday. I would really love that very much. Thank you, and I will enjoy seeing you on Wednesday or Thursday. Take good care.